Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of my podcast. I'm Caroline Chen, and I'm a rising senior in high school. Today, I had the wonderful opportunity to speak with Señor Benge, a Spanish teacher at Crystal Springs Uplands School, and I hope you all enjoy our conversation. Okay, so hola, Señor Benge.
Hola, Carolina.
Thank you for taking the time to speak with me today. I really appreciate it. Before we kind of go into the topic of like education, teaching, I wanted to ask you a little bit about yourself. So I was wondering what sparked your initial interest in like Spanish and teaching, and did you know you wanted to pursue this when you were in high school?
So specific to teaching, I wanted to be a teacher pretty much my whole life. I just loved school. School was the space for me that it kind of provided for me some of that structure and consistency that like my home life didn't. So I grew up in a really hyper rural area. I grew up on ranches in Texas and New Mexico. And so when I say I grew up in a rural area, it was like our closest neighbors were like 20 or 30 minutes driving. And
God.
so like no neighbors basically. And to get to school was like an hour and a half by car and by bus, by car and then by bus. So like super, super rural areas. But like school, I just loved it. And like as soon as I kind of plugged in a little bit, I was like, oh, this is what I want to do. And the teachers in my life were the kind of role models that I needed at that time. And then so I was really good at school and I succeeded in those spaces. So then I was just like, oh, I want to do this. So I was that kid who's like 3 years old, 5 years old, and wanted to play school with anybody, wanted to like play teacher or something. The Spanish stuff didn't happen until later. So I studied abroad in high school. I was really lucky to get a scholarship to be able to live overseas. And in the end, I was supposed to go to Argentina, and then about a week, you don't choose where you go with Rotary, and so they decided to assign me to a rural farming community in New Zealand instead. And so New Zealand speaks English, of course, but what I didn't realize when I went there was that so many of the students from different countries didn't speak English. And we would meet every 2 or 3 months throughout the year as like a group, and we would come together for like 3 or 4 days to these like student exchange student events. And so on our first one, so many of the students just like had zero English, like zero English. And I got to see over the course of the year how their English not only grew and then exploded, at the end of the year, they were like crazy fluent. Like, just some of them didn't have accents, or even if they had a little bit of an accent, their English was just like so high level. And at that stage in my life, like learning a different language wasn't maybe what I most needed. The universe was giving me what I needed, which was examples of stable family lives and just like the opportunity to be like an authentic version of myself that I wasn't able to be in my family. But when I got back to the US and I was supposed to just like take my standard language courses or something in college, I I think a lot of students who study language just think it's this thing you're supposed to chip away at and study. Like, I do some art, I do some language, I do some math. But for me, I knew that I could actually learn a different language and really become highly fluent if I committed myself to it because I had seen that example like hundreds of times. And so I think I didn't study it in the same way. A lot of my classmates were kind of like, yeah, whatever, Spanish or whatever language they chose. And I was like, no, no. Like, I missed this opportunity. I, if I would have lived in Argentina or somewhere else, like, I would have come back after a year being like crazy fluent. So I wanted to like regain that like thing that I missed out on. And so I love my language classes so much that by the time I was in my second year of Spanish, like as a sophomore in college, I was like, oh, I want to do this for other people. So I studied abroad 4 times, I think, before I graduated high school, college. And every time I did it, I was just like, oh, opening, like, because I study a language, I'm able to go and see different cultures, have all these really cool experiences, have my mind opened to different ways of living and different ways of seeing the world. I want to be a part of other people's journey to that same thing. So by the time I was in my sophomore year, I was like, oh, this is what I'm going to teach. Yeah. So then those things kind of combined for me, and I pursued studying not just education, but then like linguistics. And then I got my master's in specifically teaching Spanish. So my master's degree from Spain is in teaching Spanish as a second language.
Wow, that's so cool. Thank you for sharing. And I think it's so beautiful how you're able to bring your own experience and your own personal wish that you were able to, I think you said you were able to like immerse yourself in a language earlier on and kind of like bring it to other people in a sense. And I think that's so cool and like such a kind thing to like kind mentality to have. And could I ask you, you said you studied abroad 4 times in college. Is that correct? Or
I don't know. Let's see. So I
yeah,
studied
that's
abroad in New
best.
Zealand when I was in undergrad, and
Mhm.
then I lived in Costa Rica. I
Mhm.
lived in Mexico. I lived in Spain. So I think 3 times in undergrad, and then I did the Peace Corps after college. So the fourth time was right after college.
Oh wow, that's so cool. And were there any specific experiences during those times that helped you really like realize anything significant about yourself or language?
Yeah, I mean, too many things to share briefly, and so that we would need hours and hours to share like all of the significant experiences that I had. But I think I realized pretty early on that so I studied level 1 and 2 of Spanish before I moved to Mexico
Mhm.
for a summer. And by the time I finished year 2 of like Spanish 2, I realized that like textbook and classroom Spanish was only going to get me so far. And I was really passionate about it. I was not just like doing my homework or trying to get a good grade. I was like really, really wanting to I had this like fantasy of when people would interact with me, they would be like, no, but like, how do you speak this good? Like, how is your accent so good? Why do you speak like a native speaker? So that was kind of my fantasy. And when I was realizing after like year 1 or year 2 that I was like never gonna actually be that without working or living or something in like a real world context. And when you're in level 1 and 2 in college, it's like 3 hour courses. It's like a 3 credit course. So each class that you're doing is 3 hours. And then I think in 1 month or even like 2 weeks of living in Mexico was equivalent to like 2 years of being in class because if you're around people who don't speak English, like the need aspect is so high. Like you like have to figure out how to like do the things, and you're constantly in positions where if you don't communicate yourself a little bit clearer you might offend somebody, or they're just not going to understand you, or like suddenly you're sick and you're going to the hospital because you need help and they don't speak English, and you're like, okay, so how do I take my expression from like caveman to like help me to like, oh, what if I got a job in Spanish, or what if I like was leading something in Spanish? So it took off so much faster that I realized when I got back to my like level 3 course in college, I was like, oh, this is too slow for me. I need something that's much more like, let me jump into the deep end, and even if I have trouble swimming, like I'm gonna enjoy that. I'm gonna enjoy the sensation of like it being so fast and so intense, but the payoff is so high.
Yeah, I definitely resonate so much with that because I took AP Mandarin this year, like the exam without, like I self-studied it. And Mandarin was my first language because my grandparents essentially raised me and they only speak Mandarin. And throughout COVID, they weren't here as much because, I mean, COVID, and they were just in their hometown in Asia. And essentially, like leading up to the exam, I just told my entire family, okay, I am not speaking a single word of English to you. We're gonna only speak Mandarin because I had realized my Mandarin skills had like deteriorated so much for not being able to practice. And I think it's just the whole, like, I think availability and exposure of it in your day-to-day life that really just helped me pick it up so much faster than if
Well,
it.
in terms of what you're describing, there's this like plateau thing that happens. So like when you first start studying a language, you kind of it's you have to like work really, really hard to get kind of climb up a little bit. And if you stop studying it, you fall back down to like zero.
Yeah, and
But
I also felt that with Spanish as well because I think in your classes just so much speaking practice, presenting practice. Like I was okay, I wouldn't say I was fluent, but I could communicate. Oh, I have a funny story. So I think over the summer after sophomore year, I was alone in an Uber. It was like a 30-minute Uber. And then the driver just, I don't think he spoke a single word of English. And he was about to turn left in an area where he was supposed to turn right. And I was like, oh my God, what do I do? What do I do? And then I just go like, oh, derecha. And then we just hold a 40-minute Spanish conversation throughout the entire car ride. And it was so cool. And I wanted to like come like email you about it. I was like, oh my God, it's so cool. And it's just like I don't think I would have been able to do that if I hadn't like
that's
I
one of
feel
the things I like
like
about
it's going down because I'm not constantly practicing because I'm still taking Spanish, but it's so much less than what I was doing in your course. Yeah.
hmm, I think the cool thing, so the plateau thing is like once you get up to that plateau, like once you get over that edge, you don't actually fall back down to zero. You just kind of fall back down to the
Yeah.
like the level before you. So like if you're up to like level four, or these things don't exist, but like level four, you're not gonna, if you stop using it, you're not gonna go all the way back down to zero. You might go back down to like three, but then with a little bit of effort, you can
Yeah.
sort
It's easier to go back up than it was if you hadn't gotten up there before.
of
Kind
the Uber thing, like that's one of the reasons we do stuff like Talk Abroad. It's not actually about the grade or even like having some sort of perfect conversation. It's more like a good opportunity for students to realize I
of,
can go out into the real world and it works. Like
yeah,
it might not be smooth, it might not be perfect, but like
like my grammar was horrible, but
yeah, but who cares?
we talked for 40 minutes. I learned so much about him and I got to talk about your class with him and stuff like that. Yeah. And also, yeah, thank you so much for going into that. Sorry, I was kind of rambling a little bit, but kind of going back to what you were saying earlier, you talked about how through school you're able to like find so many role models through your teachers and adults in the community. And I was wondering, are there any particular experiences or people that really helped you learn a lot about yourself in the world?
When I was in school,
Yeah, when you were, yeah, in school.
in K through 12, there were numerous people, but I would say like in general, I just had good solid teachers, not necessarily one or two who were particular role models. I was fortunate that even though I grew up in the rural area, the teachers that I had were just really consistent. They were clear about their expectations, and I kind of got some of the parenting stability and just like consistency and like meeting expectations that weren't really a part of my home life. And so that was like a space for me to really be able to grow in as I was getting older. And then when I was in high school, there was a teacher who was amazing. She was like a government teacher, political science teacher. And when I was trying to figure out a little bit more of who I was, or I had come out of the closet quite so much. Just having somebody who saw me and was able to just like level with me as a little bit more of an adult, like didn't treat me as, even though I was a kid, like sort of treated me with, respected me in the same way that like she would an adult, that really like set me up for just being like, oh, like I can find people who I can just be my full self with, and it's not about grades or it's not about like doing whatever I have to do because of this relationship. It's just like there are people who will just treat you like a person and you can just like grow in that way with them. So that was pretty big. Like we went on a field trip for like debate kind of thing, like a political debate competition that I was a part of. And like I stayed up talking to her until like 3 a.m. one morning.
Wow.
Like in terms of liability and stuff, it's not a good thing. Like her at this like hotel, even though there's other kids and stuff, but it's just like me and this. I think she was in her like late 50s or early 60s at that point, and it was just like these two humans connecting until like 2 or 3 a.m., just talking about like life and politics and like the world. And I'll never forget that. And when I went to college, I had one Spanish teacher who was just she Susan Stein was her name, and she was just like covered in tattoos from head to toe, like
Like,
head to toe, just
oh,
full
God.
tattoos. And I remember meeting her and being like, "Oh, and like, tell me, like, when did you start getting these tattoos?" And she's like, "After tenure, when I was like 60."
Oh
She's
my God.
getting tattoos. She was just like the coolest human, and she had lived all over the world and traveled all over the world and like knew everything about like different religions and different. She just was this like really open-minded person who just wanted to share the pathways to any of those experiences with her students. And I think I kind of got that from her a little bit. Like, I think when I interact with my students, I feel like part of what I'm trying to do is not set them on any path. Like, it doesn't have to be my path. I just want to help you, like, see the potential for all of these different things that you could do as well to get out of your own little world and your one version of life that you've been assigned um, to start with. Like, how do you see the potential for either other countries or other languages or other foods or whatever it is? Um,
Like being able to open up your perspective beyond what you had set for yourself in the past.
yeah, like the one version of life that you have, or even the five versions of life that you grew up with, there's actually like infinite numbers of that out there. How do you start engaging with that early?
Yeah, I think that's like all super beautiful. And yeah, thank you for sharing that. And I think honestly, that's also why I'm kind of interested in pursuing education. It's just like the mentorship aspect that goes beyond just teaching the material. I think if like any mentor or adult or just anyone older than a student could honestly change so much about the student in both good ways and bad, but they could change so much about the student just like beyond the subject and really impact.
Yeah, I feel really lucky to be a world language teacher. You know, other subjects have their angle as well, but like world language, it's not even, I don't feel like I'm necessarily even teaching all of my students Spanish. It's not about like the accent mark goes here or this is how you conjugate a verb. Like it's more of a vehicle for how to like expose students' brains to a certain way of thinking or expose students to like different cultures and different ways of viewing the world, even just so that they can understand their own culture and their own language even
Mhm.
better. So I feel really lucky that I fell into teaching world language because it's just a really easy subject to like teach open-mindedness and expose students to like different ways of thinking.
Yeah, for sure. I agree with that. And I think, yeah, after you like went through school, I think you worked at multiple different schools. I think you mentioned before in Texas, if
Yeah.
I remember correct, before coming to Crystal. And I was wondering if you could kind of take us through your experience of what those different environments were like and how that kind of shaped your philosophy as an educator.
Yeah, so I grew up very low income. I'm first gen, so I'm the first person in my family to go to college. And I grew up in a very low income environment and went to just a rural public school. I didn't even know, I knew that private schools existed, kind of. Like in my mind, private schools were sort of like Harvard and Yale, and then there's maybe some sort of equivalent for that, like in elementary school or high school. But I didn't, I where I grew up, most private schools, well, we didn't have private schools where I grew up, but most private schools were religious. So you didn't go to a private school because they had a better education necessarily. You went to a private school because you were of that religion or you wanted to be in an environment that was really exclusively or limited to a certain like religious belief system. And because I was gay and because I didn't have some of those I came out really early as non-Christian, which was a pretty big deal in the area that I grew up in. And so if I wasn't Christian specifically, and definitely if I was gay, being in some of those hyper rural Christian spaces at those kind of private schools was never going to be an option for me.
And only if you're open to talking about it, but I was wondering kind of, I'm sure that whole process took a lot of like bravery and courage in terms of like sharing your identity. I was wondering, like, what was it like doing something like that?
I think so I ended up coming out. I don't think how to say this. I think I was the kind of person who wasn't going to be able to stay in the closet very long. Like, I just being myself and not being contained was kind of non-optional. So by the time I was starting to get around like 12, 13, 14, like I just was willing to engage with whatever consequences there were as I was kind of pushing myself out there. And then by the time the cat was a little bit out of the bag and I was experiencing a lot of the social outcast aspects of coming out, and especially in the area I grew up in, it was completely unacceptable to be anything other than like what you were supposed to be. And I'm really grateful for when you're outcast in that way, when you're sort of broken and you're this thing that you're not supposed to be, it's a really liberating experience. So from the age of like 14, 15 when I came out, I ended up leaving home. I ended up, I was fully rejected by society and by family. And even though that's hard when you're young, it also is just this incredibly liberating experience where you're like, oh, I can just make life whatever I want it to be. I can really just go down whatever path I want. I don't have to go down the path that my family sets for me. Or if what I want is not supposed to be what I want, or not supposed to be what I'm supposed to do, then I can just pick and choose what I want to do. So there was a freedom that came with that. And then once you're painted as like the black sheep or the purple sheep, like you can really just have the freedom to be what you want in other aspects as well. So I think that really affected the way that I moved through the world because you're supposed to study this thing. You're supposed to go down this path in life. You're supposed to get married and have kids by this age. And really early, I was able to figure out like, just because somebody says that's what you're supposed to do doesn't mean that that's what I'm gonna do or even what's best for me. So there's a certain freedom that came in that.
Wow, that's pretty crazy. Yeah, thank you so much for being willing to share that. And I'm so sorry you had to go through all that when
Oh,
you.
I'm not. I appreciate the sentiment of what you mean by that, but I'm really grateful to have gone through the hardship of being queer and being different from a young age because um, I wouldn't have some of the strength and I wouldn't be living the life that I am now. And I feel like some people actually, if they're a little more on the cusp, or they're kind of like slightly different, but not different enough to be fully like rejected and outcast by society, they're actually kind of trapped by society and
Feel
society.
like internalized homophobia is a really real thing in the queer community. Um, that I've like experienced and like talked to people who have experienced as well.
Yeah. Yeah, and like sexual orientation is one version of this, but there's so many other aspects of identity that people feel they have to conform to, even if that doesn't feel authentic to them, but it's safer to just conform. Yeah, so I'm grateful. It was hard at a certain stage, but even by the time I think I was graduating high school, I was pretty like strong and independent about those things. And I was like, yep, I'm over here doing this completely different thing to everybody else. And, take it or leave it. If you like me, if you like what I'm doing, then maybe we could be friends. If you don't, like, you go do you. I'm going to be over here doing me. And I'm grateful that I had that early in life rather than in like my 20s and 30s because I think it's harder the older you get to sort of tear down and rebuild.
Yeah, I totally see what you're getting at. And I think it's so cool how, or it's not cool, but it's like really awesome how you're able to like really learn that stuff from a young age and kind of through
Yeah.
experience as
And my
well.
brother played a role in that too. My brother has Down syndrome, and he's just like the coolest human. He's just like an amazing, like bright light of a person, and he's so kind. And like he was kind of like society, we were really close, especially growing up in the rural area. And when we would go to school, he was defined as this like broken thing, this thing you're not supposed to be. And people would always apologize. I'm like, oh, I'm so sorry that your brother has Down syndrome, or that must be so hard. And I was like, what are you talking about? He's amazing. And seeing the way that kids would treat him, or kids would sort of like mock him for being different. And I knew how awesome he was. So I think that was a gift in a way too when I was growing up, because I was like, oh, what people think you're supposed to be or what people say is the right way to do things kind of sucks. Like, I don't want to do that. So I prefer that version. So let's just like go away from the norm and do whatever we want to do.
Yeah, that's so cool. And yeah, you're such a cool person, Señor Benge. Like, I think I've learned so much from you about you already from our conversation. And yeah, thank you so much for sharing all of that. And kind of transitioning off of that, I was wondering, have these experiences and the stuff you just talked about that you gained from it impact the way that you both teach students as a whole, or you're also the faculty advisor for the LGBTQ plus affinity space, which I now have the opportunity to co-lead, which is awesome. And I was wondering, like, how does your personal journey kind of influence the way you build these spaces and communities for students today?
Yeah, I think I I know as a teacher that like my experience is different from that of my students, but like it's my role to like be one part of the school experience that students have where, you know, I know that my students might also need to get from me something that they're not getting from somewhere else in their life. You know, there are students who have really um, equally unstable home lives in the way that I did when I was growing up, or even if their home life is good, they're just not getting from it something that would be good for them, something that would help them grow or, help them uh, find some sort of balance or something that they're going to need that they're not getting from their home life. I also think, as a gay person being a teacher, I hear from queer students oftentimes, like, it's so great to have you. It's so great to have representation. It's so great to see somebody who's just gay and just living their life and married and has kids and
Yeah,
it doesn't matter. But I often tell people, like, it's not for the gay kids. It's
right.
not only for the queer kids that representation matters. Like, the students who are perfectly conforming or something, they also need to see representation of all of the different versions of life to see that that's a
Yeah.
perfect valid option for somebody to go and live that way and be that way and yeah.
Yeah, I completely agree with you. And I think we talked about this before we started recording, but I think like I kind of want to emulate that as a rising senior in high school because I think there was such a pressure to conform that it wasn't from the environment, like all from the environment. I think a lot of it was like internal, but it's just like the pressure to be like my peers and like hide certain parts of me that everyone else didn't have. And I hope I can kind of show underclassmen who aren't part of the community as well, kind of just what it's like. And yeah, like what you were saying earlier about just like not needing to fit the standard like box of what they envision like a, a normal person to be like. Yeah.
And exposure matters so much for things. If you have never met a person from a certain religion, or if you've never met a person from a certain lifestyle, if you've never met a vegetarian before or something like that, then you might be limited to whatever stereotypes or whatever uh, you saw on TV or something like that versus like the reality of what that can look like.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. And yeah, thank you so much for sharing all of that. And now, as we kind of wrap it up, I have one more question
Okay.
to ask you, which was, I know you've gone through so much and had so much life experience, and I was wondering if you could go back and tell your high school self one thing that you know today, what would it be? And more broadly, do you have any specific advice for high schoolers today with everything that you know now?
Ooh, big questions.
Pretty loaded question.
Yeah, no, a lot of things are coming to mind. So I think if I could go back and tell my high school self anything, I think it's a big difference between like the 14 and 15-year-old version and the like 17, 18-year-old version. Because a, a lot happens between those ages, right? Like 17, 18 is like there's a lot more self-awareness and a lot more um, just kind of feeling feeling like more self-aware, more confident, or at least that was my experience. But I think I would tell my younger self, like especially 14, 15, that like the world is so much bigger than you can realize. Like your little bubble is so small and like you can access all of the other bubbles. You're not just stuck living this one path or living this one trajectory. And like, you can't even imagine all of the forks in the road. But like, just lean into like change and lean into experimentation because then that's just going to like have a domino effect to like exposing you to lots and lots of different things, not just in terms of studies, but hobbies and different types of peoples and stuff. Because then that's really where you're going to see examples of the way other peoples are living their life. And you can just be collecting what you like from them for yourself and just leaving the aspects that you don't like.
Yeah, I think that's super powerful and something a lot of not just high schoolers, but just like everyone needs to hear because I think well, I'm taking a psychology class right now, but we were talking about how people have the tendency to only interact with individuals that are similar to them or but it's so important to interact with or at least like make the effort to be open and build relationships with people who don't like you are the complete opposite of and have different viewpoints of because that like psychologically it can really affect the way you view the world so much.
Yeah, and I see it a lot in certain students that they really feel like they're on a certain trajectory or path that they need to stay on.
Yeah.
And like even from really young, from like 10 or 12 years old, like they need to go to this school, they need to study this thing, they need to there's only the one path.
And so much of it is self-imposed. Like I'm sure a lot of family pressure could exist, but like you really learn to internalize that mentality if all of the people around you are reinforcing it.
Yeah, fortunately, life has a way of throwing curveballs at you in a good way. You know, we need some of these unexpected curveballs to come and sometimes bump us off of our path and for us to realize like, oh, that wasn't the only one.
Yes,
There are other good paths to be
I
on.
resonate with that so much. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Um, I love this stuff. I could talk about this stuff all day.
Uh-huh. I want to talk so much more, talk for so much more time with you about this stuff. But yeah, thank you so much for everything that you shared and taking the time. Okay, so thank you so much for listening to my conversation with Señor Benge. A huge thank you to Señor Benge for taking the time to speak with me. And thank you all so much for listening. I'll see you guys next time.